The underworld is out to kill you. Build a team wisely.
So we're back at the $15 Lathine tier list. Starting with the $3 tier, we've got Frefram Ruuhrteig, Nyniro, the Music Man, and of course the King of Sinners himself. If you're not familiar with the Unraveling of Lathine, then don't worry, we got you covered, and I think you'll enjoy sticking around. This is a really cool series with some of the coolest swordsmen you will ever come across. For real. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Really how I have today broken down for our $3 tier is that we have kind of three sub-tiers within the one tier. So we have the balanced tier, which is going to be Frefram and Yusei. We have the glass cannon tier, which is going to be Ruuhrteig, and the Music Man himself, Themazar. And then we've just got the tactical tier, which has Nyniro himself because he's just that cool. So we're going to start with the balanced tier, and this is going to be a lot of fun because last video we went over more so Miyune, Kea, who are very non-combatant. We covered Siegless a little, who's really not going to be your offensive focal point. So now we really get to go into your fighters, and we really get to show what makes Lathine so much fun. There's a depth to the series and to swordplay that goes beyond any other series I've ever been familiar with, just to be entirely honest. So take Lathimian for example. AWESOMENESS might be on the $4 tier. There's stronger fighters than him for all extents and purposes, like Lathidel, like maybe you could say Haonaseed. But Lathimian would rather see Lathidel any day of the week than AWESOMENESS, even though AWESOMENESS a tier lower because of matchups. AWESOMENESS is a big, that's something that Lathimian struggles with as someone who struggles to generate a lot of pop in his swings, a lot of offense. He's very defensive, so when you have a stone wall big like AWESOMENESS, there's just not much Lathimian can do about it. So he would rather see Lathidel any day of the week than AWESOMENESS because of matchups. And that's something you see a lot of in Lathine, which is again what's going to make this really fun for us to be able to start going into today. Now, as for today, we're going to start with our balanced tier, our Frefram and Yusei, the King of Sinners. We have the 4 books in the Unraveling of Lathine series. Yusei, of course, the King of Sinners, is the MC of the King of Sinners, which is the latest entry in the Unraveling of Lathine series, the 4th entry, whereas Frefram is one of the Eclipse. Okay, there we go. Maybe it won't stand. So Frefram is one of the Eclipse. We talked about Lathidel a second ago. The 2nd entry in the Unraveling of Lathine series follows Lathidel Unduli as the master, the leader of the Eclipse. And Frefram is one of the men under him. Frefram you might expect him to be almost a little weak, being under someone else, being down on the $3 tier. But this is what makes Lathine again so incredible, is matchups, in that Frefram can hold his own against Lathidel. He's going to probably beat more times than not Haonaseed on the $5 tier. He can hold his own against Teofune Lathimian on the $4 tier, Kermarine Jurthian, maybe a little bit less Jurthian, but he can put up a good, strong fight on anyone. He's not a pushover. And so again, this is going to make, what's going to make the series really fun is as you get to see the likes of Frefram, the likes of Ruuhrteig, and so on and so forth, and how strong they are, and you're going to think, how could the guys above be any stronger? It's mostly due to having a few less weaknesses, a little bit more matchup versatility, things of that sort. But with Frefram and Yusei, these are 2 guys to where they do a little bit of everything, whereas Ruuhrteig, Temi, rightfully so, you could call them glass cannons. They're very one pony trick, shall we say. And Nyniro is a little bit more strategical in what he's going to bring to your team. Frefram and Yusei are people that you can count on more so to hold ground and positioning. And this is something you want to think about if you have a team, if you have people that are trying to kill you. You can't let those people get to you, right? You have to stop them in their tracks. And so to do that, you need a mix of range. You know, you have an archer like Haonaseed. You need a mix of offensive push power. Ruuhrteig is very good at push, push, push. His battle momentum is always going forward because he's using the offensive style of swordplay, Homeosis. So he's always going forward. He's always breaking enemy lines. But you can't focus only on breaking enemy lines. You also have to set your own lines. And so, better than anyone on this tier, Frefram does that. He uses the neutral style of swordplay Zerserva. And this really says a lot about the Master of the Eclipse also in what Frefram is doing and what he's been really bred to do. Eclipse are really bred from birth just about to be the deadliest weapons, the deadliest peacekeepers humanly possible. Really think of Jedi, it's really the same thing. There's a mix of Eclipse on this list. You have Lathine, you have Teofun Havasa on the $4, you have Alvheim on the $4, you have Frefram, Nyniro, Ruuhrteig, a good mix of them, and they all bring something very specific to the table. So Alvheim is your big, he's going to go pushing forward and holding the front line very, very well. You have Lathine to where he's a very pure duelist and he will act a little bit as a strategist. He will kind of keep a step back, he will try to find the deadliest person on the other side of a battle and then he will go take them out personally. Teofun Havasa, he is athletically more gifted than anyone that has ever lived in Lathine. He's so quick, he's so strong, he jumps so crazy high. He can cover so much ground in a fight, so he's used to provide support to get from point A. Okay, point B is having some issue. Teo, get over there. Okay, point C could use a little bit of reinforcement. Get there, Teo. Okay, A and B are good. Now we just need to really go guns a-blazing in C, and then he can use his athleticism to go gung-ho crazy. He's very flex like that, and Ruuhrteig, like we talked a little bit about, he's always pushing, very offensive. Nyniro provides a little bit of offensive punch, same thing, going kind of forward, and more so strategy. And so when you have all of those different things, you at the same time need that glue guy. You need that guy that's going to just hold a position down. Alvheim is kind of holding the front line down, you could say. Frefram is more so holding down a line a little bit back. He's more so typically holding down a path so that if you have point A and point B over here, Alvheim's over here pushing the front line forward, but Frefram is keeping a little back so that the men in point A and point B have a clear runway to get from each other to the other and so on and so forth to really traverse where they need to go. So Frefram, in order to fit in with the Eclipse, plays accordingly to what the Eclipse need. And so again, he's taken the neutral form of swordplay Zerserva. He can give you a little bit of offensive punch, he can give you a little bit of defensive punch. He's excellent with a blade. He's, in terms of raw talent, about as good as anyone. Lathine on the $5 tier has even noted, he noted in the Master of the Eclipse when he has his duel against Lithimian, who's on the $4 tier, he noted how in terms of raw sword skill, he can't really put himself above Frefram. Frefram's just genuinely that good. So Frefram is focused on holding ground, on being a duelist, on doing a little bit of everything. He's quick, so if you need him to get to a point, he can do that. He's strong. If you need him to push a line, he can. But more so, he's there to be your glue guy. That's what he does best. That's what he's most comfortable with. So if you can keep him in that role, that's the best role to keep him in. And that can be really good to have an option like Frefram for only $3. So if your team has, say, a lot of push forward guys like Ruuhrteig or a lot of crazy footwork guys that are kind of going all over the place, a little unpredictable, like Teofun, for example, or Yusei or Themazar. It's very nice to have someone that's reliable, that can just hold down a spot naturally and organically. So that's Frefram's big draw here, is being the best glue guy on the entire tier list, like cost considered, easily. And so that raises the question of, if Frefram does that role so well, if he's like the best glue guy, period, then does that make Yusei invalid? Well, not at all, because Yusei, as much as he's a glue guy, he's a little bit more of a chaotic glue guy. He's a little bit more of a quote-unquote, to use a basketball term, a little bit of a combo guard. He's going to give you a little bit of playmaking and a little bit of punch. He's going to kind of hold down lines, but what Yusei excels at is causing havoc. He's got his knives on him. He's got his sword on him. He has no issue. Like, Yusei is better at taking out an enemy, taking their equipment in the blink of an eye, like swords, knives, etc., using that as like ammo. He's so extremely good at causing havoc like that. His footwork is extremely clean. He's never impatient. He's very good at staying back and waiting as long as possible to find the best opening possible. And in a battle, a lot of times you don't have a lot of space, shall we say. So it's very good to have someone like Yusei, to where his footwork is something that he can use to dance even in small spaces in order to maneuver himself according to what your team needs. So in that way, he's more flexible than Frefram, who Frefram's more so holding a spot down. Yusei more so will hold a general area down, shall we say. Frefram's going to hold this spot right here down. Yusei is going to more so hold that down. And Yusei, again, he's so extremely agile. He's so extremely quick. He's so good with knives, with even sword play. If you need him to handle a duel head on, he's still very good at that. And so he provides a lot of flexibility in that way. The other thing about Yusei that you can't say enough about is, if you've read The King of Sinners, you'll be decently familiar with Harrison. He's a little bit of he's essentially Yusei's closest friend, childhood friend. He's a little bit on the bigger spectrum. He's very strong, pretty damn tall. And so Yusei fundamentally, consequently, plays very well with bigs. It's a kind of a Kobe and Shaq situation, to where if you give Yusei a quote-unquote lob threat, if you give him a big to play off of, he's just going to absolutely feast. And he provides a very nice niche in that way, in that if you take like an Alvim, a Loshki, a Myrmedak, he's going to have instant chemistry with them. He's going to be able to really do the same things he does with Harrison, that same 1-2 man game, that same back and forth, my turn, your turn, play off of each other, quote unquote, getting screens. Like a lot of basketball terminology you can really carry over with Yusei when it comes to him and bigs. So in the balanced tier, that's really the big takeaway. If you need someone to more so hold a spot because you have a lot of push forward guys or hectic guys like Teo or Themazar, Frefram's probably your guy. But if you have a lot of people that are going to hold ground, like Myrmedak, like Loshki, like Alvim, really bigs in general, if you have guys that are very good at holding space, like Veseleth or Lethadel, then Yusei's probably your pick, because then you have an extra tool for more effectively breaking enemy lines than Frefram is going to. Frefram can be good at helping to break lines, but he's not Yusei. Yusei's second to none off the $3 tier, with the exception of probably Ruuhrteig. So Yusei, a little bit more of a flexible balance piece, whereas Frefram's a true balance piece. And after balance pieces is of course our glass cannons. Ruuhrteig Velaquil Ersil of the Eclipse. He's using the offensive form of swordplay Homeosis, which means he's always pushing forward. That's the battle flow he has. He's always creating space, or trying to at least. And Themazar, also known as the Music Man. So Themazar is a little bit of a shifty mover. You have quote-unquote duelists, to where they have true sword skills and play accordingly, like Jerthi and like Frefram. They typically hold a spot. And you have bigs like Loshki, like Myrmedak, like Alvim. They kind of have this gravity to them. They throw their weight around and kind of force the battle to go certain ways. And then you have what's known as runners in Lathine. These are guys that are very footwork heavy, that are very movement heavy. So this is a Teofun Havasa, this is a Heonasi, this is a Themazar, this is a Yusei also. Their battle flow isn't forward, it's not back, it's not neutral like Frefram. It's really like that SpongeBob meme about here and here and here and all over the place.
We're not talking about this or this, we're talking about this!
So they're very shifty and, in a sense, unreliable, but in a pro, unpredictable for the enemy to plan around. It's very difficult. Runners also are very good, like we talked about with Yusei, about moving in very limited spaces. They have excellent footwork, really big spaces, small spaces, and they're very good at putting themselves into advantageous positions just by their footwork, which is huge because a lot of guys have to rely just on outplaying you with the sword. And so Yusei, Themazar, Teo, Haonaseed have this element to them in that they don't have to be a one-trick pony on just having to outfight you with the blade. They can also outmove you. They can also put themselves in a good position to be able to then heighten what they can do with a blade. And Themazar, as good as Yusei is, Themazar, in a sense, Themazar's footwork is better when it comes to dueling a man one-on-one. Themazar's footwork is significantly better than Yusei's. When it comes to traversing a battlefield, Yusei is better with all of the different enemies and different weapons and different things going around considered. So this is really what it comes down to with Themazar. He is the best swordsman on this $3 tier, easily, for sure. He's someone that's been a thorn in the side of Juuhrteig, Kedmarine, Lathimian for years, the absolute best of the best in Lathine, in Sohal specifically. He uses the neutral form of swordplay Zerserva, as well as the form of swordplay Ivory, and Ivory is really tailored to people with more so low physique. It's very stab heavy, it's very range heavy, it's very distance heavy. You try to keep as much space as humanly possible. It's very bait and punish, and that really does tell you without telling you what Themazar is doing. He's moving all over the place, he's bait and punish, and that's his go-to. But secondarily, he is, in terms of raw sword skills, the second best swordsman on this entire tier list from $5 to $2. In terms of raw sword ability, Juuhrteig's better. I wouldn't say anyone else is better than Themazar. And so it can bleed to the question, why is he not higher? Well, Themazar is more a tourney fighter. He doesn't necessarily have experience as much in life and death battles. That's why I made the distinction of Yusei having better footwork for a battlefield, whereas Themazar has a better footwork arsenal one-on-one. He's got more moves. He's a lot more fluent with all of them. He's a little bit more strategic, whereas Yusei can kind of move sometimes just to move. Same thing with Teo. They can move sometimes just to move and kind of almost hope the enemy just makes a bad movement and they'll react accordingly. Themazar is more methodical. He knows what he's doing in neutral with his footwork better than probably anyone on this tier list not named Lethadel and Dooley, because Lethadel he's Einstein up here. It's a little scary. So Themazar, more than anyone on the $3 tier, he is that guy that you set up as, in a sense, a focal point. If you're taking Themazar, then there's a good chance you want him to be your one-on-one specialist. If you have a problem guy on the other side, Themazar is, in terms of cost effectiveness, he's the guy to go to. He's so extremely good at one-on-one duels, and this is what he wants to do. He wants to play one-on-one. That's not to say he's bad in a team setting. It's just that since that's not something he's super familiar with, it's sort of a situation to where if you've ever played like a shooter, for example, you can have people, you're going to be familiar with people that more so play for their own kill streaks than to play the objective, shall we say. Themazar is playing a little bit more for his own kill streak, not because he's being selfish, but because he's not really as familiar or comfortable with quote-unquote playing the objective. So it's that thing to keep in mind is you want a good strategist if you take Themazar, and you want to be able to let him play to his strengths, which is being a one-on-one duelist. And this is the same thing with Ruuhrteig. You need to play to his strengths. Ruuhrteig uses the offensive form of swordplay Homeosis, like we've said a few times already, he's pushing forward. That's his battle flow, whereas Themazar is all over the place. Yusei's all over the place, but probably a smaller radius. He's better at holding a spot down. Frefram just holds a spot down, and Nyniro is more so kind of your tactician, staying back, but his natural battle flow is forward mildly. That considered, Ruuhrteig wants to go forward, and because he wants to go forward, that means he doesn't want to stay still, he doesn't want to go back. His sword skills are incredible, but they're very one trick. You know, you kind of think of like a home run hitter in a way, that kind of like the true 3 outcome sort of guy. He's going to walk, hit a home run, or strike out. That's essentially Ruuhrteig. He's always going for home runs. He's not really good at going the other way, slapping a single, slapping a double down the line, putting the bunt down if the left side of the infield's open. So you have to keep in mind that Ruuhrteig just does not have a defensive skill set. He does not work on defense. He needs to be going forward. And if you put yourself in a position to where you've built your team to support Ruuhrteig, and you have a good tactician, if you can let Ruuhrteig play to his strengths, he's unstoppable on offense. He is going to break enemy lines as well as anyone on this tier list. He's going to do it better than Lathine. He's going to do it better than Haonaseed. He's going to do it better than Mermadak, because Mermadak is a little slow. He's genuinely that good. He's so quick. His raw run speed is probably tied. He's tied with Teo for the best run speed, I would say, if not the best. Like, if I have to give the edge to one, it might be Ruuhrteig by a literal fraction of a hair. But he's so extremely quick. He is so extremely gifted offensively, and so this is the number one thing with Ruuhrteig, is you need to build your team accordingly to support him. Same thing with Themazar, you need to build your team accordingly to support them. Whereas Frefram is more so a glue guy. Again, Yusei's a glue guy. You really, after you've picked your focal points and played to their strengths, then you kind of fall back on Frefram and Yusei to patch the holes in the deck, quote unquote. So it's important to keep in mind what you're doing with your team. Like, if you have a team with, say, Lathimian, who's very defensive, $4 tier, Haonaseed, he wants to shoot arrows. You have Mermadak, who's kind of slow. Let's say you do that, for example, or something similar. That's kind of the group of guys you're picking. What you're then lacking is that guy that can go out there and just shazzle on the enemy lines. And Ruuhrteig is so quick that he's always going to get the jump on the enemy in neutral. He always gets to call the shots. He always gets to start battle on his terms because he's just too quick. He's going to be quicker than the other guy 99.9999999% of the time, unless he's fighting like Teofun or something weird, which why would he be fighting Teofun? So Ruuhrteig covers you if you're lacking that offensive punch, that speed to go out there and start neutral on your own terms. You don't really want to be in a fighting position to where you have a bunch of slower or more defensively oriented guys, because then the problem is if your enemy has quicker guys or they have arrows, they can kind of camp you out. They can kind of call all the shots on where they want to engage and not. And so Ruuhrteig, again, if your team is built a little defensively, a little slow, he fixes every problem your team has. He's so extremely quick, and that will help your team immensely. In the same sort of way that if you have, a strategy heavy team or some non-combatants like Mione or Siglis, or someone that wants to stay back like Haonaseed, or someone that's not quick enough to get to the other team's strongest guy like Mermadak, in the same way that Themazar then is the guy you want because he's quick enough to go after someone. He's got the footwork to be able to get around enemies and kind of navigate tight spaces, and he has the sword skills to handle one-on-one duels better than anyone. And we went over a little bit how Ruuhrteig's issue is defense, and likewise Themazar's issue is not that he isn't strong. He's extremely strong, he's absolutely jacked, but there's just this element of his sword play when he's always moving around with his feet to where he's not really necessarily using his muscles as much, so he tends to not put a lot of thump on his sword play on his swings, and this typically isn't really an issue because then he has less wind-up, right? He has less commitment, he has quicker swings, which works good for him when he wants to bait, move, when the other person commits to a swing and punish accordingly. But against bigs, that can be an issue. Themazar, again, he would rather see Lathine or Haonaseed than Alveem, even though Alveem's, for all intents and purposes, you know, down to the $4 tier. And that's the importance of Lathine, is that matchups are so extremely important. You really have to think through your team, what everyone's doing, what everyone wants to do, in some cases what people have been like literally bred to do in terms of the Eclipse. And so yeah, that's our first four. Frefram's the true glue guy, Yusei's the glue and combo line breaker blitz sort of guy. Ruuhrteig can go out there and just shazzle on the enemy lines. And Themazar is the best one-on-one duelist easily in this tier. Easily. So if you have a problem person on the other team, Themazar is just going to be second to none at handling that. So that takes us down to Nyniro. So Nyniro is the one guy that stands alone in the tactics subcategory for today. In the Master of the Eclipse, Lathine, who we talked about, ended up being the Master of the Eclipse, but for the longest time Nyniro trained for that role to take it down the line, and Nyniro was very happy for Lathine when he saw Lathine going forward for that rank to try to vie for that, and that's a story of its own. But either way, that really sums up the heart of who Nyniro is he's that tactics guy, he's that logistics guy, he's that leader. Like, if you have a list of guys, I mean, everyone in the above tiers for the most part can lead your group exceptionally well. Besteleth might be the exception. That's not something he's as comfortable with. Alveem and Teo might not necessarily be as experienced with that, and Ruuhrteig not really either, who you want to have helming your group. But if you take kind of guys that are more fighting oriented and not really leadership and tactics oriented, then Nyniro, again, like we talked about with Ruuhrteig, Themazar, in that they have weaknesses, but depending on your team, the way you put it together, those weaknesses are completely invalidated and don't really matter. In the same way, if you take a little bit more of a fighting-oriented team, Nyniro's perfect, because then you have those guys to focus on the fighting, and he can stay back a little bit and sort of direct and navigate your team, sort of look at the battlefield, push people around accordingly, communicate with your other members of your team as to what's going on in the battle and what they need to do differently, or if someone's sneaking up around the corner, yada yada yada. He does all that stuff in battle, and then outside of battle he's as good as anyone. He's an extremely stupid good negotiator. He's very good at stealth. He's very good at, again, like we talked about, logistics, leadership, anything. He's really second to none. At worst, you could try to say like Haonaseed or Mermerdak or something is on his level, but you can't put anyone above Nyniro. And this is something important to think about. If you're in a fight, what do you want your best fighters to be able to do? You want them to fight, right? And so this is where Nyniro's value comes in, is you don't want Lathine to necessarily have to pull back a little bit to assess fights, to play tactician. You don't really necessarily want him to have to keep a step back. And so Nyniro is great in that he can take, for only $3 to be able to take him, he can be that guy that kind of steps back a little bit. His sword skills are probably the least for all extents and purposes of everyone on this tier list, not in the $2 tier. That's not to say he's a bad fighter. He's still like a top 1% fighter. The problem is when we have literal Lathinian goats like Lethidel, you could argue is the strongest sword fighter ever for all intents and purposes. Like Loshki, same thing, like Jerthian, like Veseleth. We're talking literally compared to the greatest of the greatest. And so it's that thing about, if you're only averaging, say, 10 points in the NBA, you know, you're still top 1% in the entire world easy. You might not necessarily be Michael Jordan, you might not be that Lethidel Jerthian tier, but you're still extremely gifted offensively, defensively, all that stuff. And so that's the second aspect of Nyniro, is his natural swordplay style is geared to homeosis, which is the offensive style of swordplay we talked about with Ruuhrteig. When you have homeosis, you always want to make a subtle advance and or a very harsh offensive push like Ruuhrteig does. Nyniro doesn't have Ruuhrteig's speed, so he's a little bit more into the soft offensive push category. So in terms of sword fighting, he's a little bit of a niche sort of guy. He's a little bit tailored to dealing a little bit more so maybe with the stronger guys on the enemy team. So he can deal a little bit with everyone for sure. He's top 1%. 99% of times he's going to be able to handle whoever's on the enemy team without really any issues. But it's nice also that he kind of has this aspect to where he's geared for specific matchups, so that again, you can just try to leverage his strengths, and which is, I mean, what you're already doing, taking that leadership sort of role and really running with it to its max so that your fighters can focus on fighting. But it's nice to where he's geared again to those sort of specific matchups, so that you can have those, again, matchups that he's just going to take very, very easily, do exceptionally well on, and then he can just kind of fall back to doing his tactician thing, to doing his sort of overseer sort of thing, logistics thing. And so that really kind of sums up Nyniro in a nutshell, in what he's doing, what he's providing. Again, there's really not any right answer with building your team, and again, you can really tell that from this tier list, or this tier with sub-tiers, this $3 tier. Do you need Frefram to round out your team, hold spots, be a glue guy? Do you need Ruuhrteig to create space, to keep the other side, to keep your enemies on the defensive and never really able to get into good positions? Do you need Nyniro so that you have the logistics, everything perfected? You're probably going to be able to avoid a lot of fights in the first place. He's going to always have you in good positions to fight in the first place. He's going to have you in good, terrain. All of your routes are going to be very, very good, everywhere. He's always probably going to keep you with the high ground and some other good stuff like that.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
He's really just the quintessential guy to where he makes everyone around him better. He's like a very good playmaker, like to speak in, again, basketball terms. Do you need Themazar? Again, your one-on-one specialist. He's just going to completely destroy everyone on the enemy team one-on-one. Or do you need Yusei's flexibility, to where he's more flexible than anyone on this tier list, and he's so good at also just casually breaking enemy lines with his speed, with his knife play. He plays off of big so well. Like, if you take a Loshki and then with that Galvin, you just have to immediately think about taking Yusei. It's always a very good bet. It's something he's very comfortable with, something he does very good with. Definitely let me know what you're thinking about these guys. If you had to take off of this tier, who you would be kind of inclined towards taking. We're going to do the $4 tier and the $5 tier sooner than later, hopefully. And we have a special guest, one last inclusion we're going to include. We're not going to say whether it's the $4 tier or the $5 tier, but we're also going to add Ringface. He's really a Lathinian classic. At this point in time when the tier list was made, he didn't necessarily have any official art or anything like that, so kind of kept him off. But now that he's got his stuff, he is going to be making a sneak attack appearance, which is so Ringface. He's from the Lady of Light, which stars Siegless, who's actually on the $2 tier. It's funny because Kea, the heroine star of Miracle Maiden, is also on the $2 tier. So Kea Siegless on the $2 tier, Yusei on the 3, Lethidel on the 5. is your 4 Lathinian MCs. So that's kind of how that breaks down for y'all. So yeah, let me know who you're kind of interested in on the $4 tier and $5 tier, who looks cool, who you want to know about the most, and who you kind of are most into from the $3 tier. Definitely let me know in the comments. Subscribe and share to help out this coverage of an awesome indie horror series in the Unraveling of Lathine. And without any further ado, lights out.